My name's Bron Stuckey. I'm from Australia, as you might tell by my accent. And I work in the field of communities of practice, games and community building. And I hopefully can talk about some signals that I picked up this morning that I can demonstrate in the work that I'm doing, from Brian about connecting people, from Phaedra about perhaps looking for that holy grail of cultural transformation, and from BJ, new ways for behavioural change. So I'm working in the area of communities of practice, and teacher professional development is what I'll be talking about today. But communities of practice in general, looking at improving practice, knowledge sharing, and for me the holy grail, knowledge creation. So I'm looking at what we can do with gamification for a goal way beyond competition. Okay, and Amy Jo Kim, who is presenting here, I believe, says that gamification and community are probably two of the most misunderstood words on the planet. And in this 22 minutes, much reduced now, I'm going to try and put those together in a way that, that makes sense. And I work on a global stage, so I'm a research fellow of the Arizona State University Center for Games and Impact, and I've worked in games and games learning for the last 10 years in multiplayer games. Now I can't advance the slides. So this is a list of things I'm not talking about, although these are juicy topics that I do work on. So these are things that I could talk about, but I don't have the time to address today. And the 3 case studies I'm going to tell you about, I also can't go into a great deal of depth about their design. But I am interested in all of these areas, and these are all things that are close to my heart and that I'm researching or building platforms for. So we know that we in this room know that competition's probably not a dirty word, but these are quotes from people, the kind of people that I work with in teacher professional learning, and I'm talking about that's in academic contexts, in school contexts, and in vocational education. And most of them think that anything gamified is about play and is not a serious state for them. And that's a really difficult space to work in. Even in communities of practice, I'm kind of telling them there's this, you need to experience this really good thing that's going to be great for your profession, but I've got to entice them to get in there. It's the medicine they didn't know they were going to need. So many of the educators I work with have reported a lot of surprise at how competitive they were when they did enter into a gamified space. So actually having that experience shifts them along the way. And they report a lot of progress towards completion through the gamified spaces that they've entered into. But the juicy part I want to get to is some work that Jane McGonigal's doing, and she talked at the Games for Change Summit about signals, looking for signals, and to see those signals perhaps as jelly bean flavours. And when you put several jelly bean flavours in your mouth, the combination might actually be a creation of a new flavour or a new taste. And so that set me off on looking at the case studies that I was doing in a little different way to look for what were the signals of community development in those cases. And what could we learn from those particular cases, the richest part of the learning from each of those cases. And this notion of signals is a thread that goes through all of what I'm doing today. So the signals I'm looking for is that can we design spaces that assist the cultivation of professional learning communities? And I'm talking about much more here than user spaces or building loyalty programs, and I'm not denigrating any of those, but I'm talking about much more relational systems where people are working together to build knowledge. So I want to explore those deeper relations for knowledge sharing and knowledge creation. And looking to see what was the evidence we have that any of this is of use. Well, probably one of my gurus, and maybe some of you in this room, is Jim G. And Jim talks a great deal about the Big G game. So those of you who play World of Warcraft, and Phaedra touched on this morning, know that there is something more than the digital media of that game that people engage in. And affinity spaces, as Jim calls them, grow out of play in that game. So the game engenders spaces and community. And a very tight community, but focused back on playing the game. So members of those affinity spaces are involved in activities like modding and theory crafting and extending the play of the game. And they're very important to the game itself and to the players. So we know from gameplay in massively multiplayer online roleplay games that this organically forming community can, that the game can engender this community, and then that can be of benefit back to the practice of the game. So the spaces Jim's talking about is where the community is as metagame. So the community is the larger space for play and extends the activity of the game. And most of you will have tasted that firsthand if you play World of Warcraft, if you have children who play multiplayer Minecraft, if you have engaged in any large online roleplay game. So that's the organically forming system that I'm interested in trying to cultivate. And so this is the space I'm looking at here. If you look on the left, you'll see Jim G's community serves as game and practice. So the community is working to serve the game, to the betterment of the game, and extending the game. And right at the other side, you'll see community serves a practice, where the game itself, the gamification, is serving the practice wholly, not necessarily the play in the game. And I just want to say I do, and I'm very pleased a number of speakers this morning defined the difference between game and gamification. And I'm just using that G there as a symbol, but on the right-hand side it implies gamification. So on the left it's for game. But I do know that they're distinctly different in most cases. In the centre you'll see a space where the community that's developed around the gamification can be serving both the game and the community. And there are various examples of those, but I really want to concentrate on the too far right, probably the furthest right, for most of what I have to say. And in the first one, the game is a piece of digital media, and the community is the fabric around it. And as Jim G says, transformative Big G games have good design atoms as affinity spaces, and people support each other to challenge what mastery means. Now that's really juicy, and that's what we want for educators to improve their professional practice, to see that they need to challenge what mastery means. So I want to take you into 3 examples. The first of this is in Australia. This is Plain, the Australian teacher community, and that was nominated last year for an award here at the Summit. It's a space that I actually worked on the design of the gamification in this case. And it's a 10-level game system based on the hero's journey. And teachers come in as a hero, and at level 5, which is our optimal level, we go through to 10. But at level 5, they're ninja, and who wouldn't want to be a ninja teacher? So, but that's not the part of the system I really want to talk about. And we built this to actually give people the experience of being in a professional community. And we know from experience that teachers want to go into a space and just grab what they need and leave. They're very in the moment. And what we wanted them to experience was the benefits they would reap if they engaged actively in a community of practice. So much of the lower levels focus them in on those kinds of activities. Moving up as you move through the system to social gifting, where they actually create the rewards and levels, and they can gift awards and rewards to each other. And as they move up, the activity in this space is tied to our teacher accreditation in Australia. So as they move up, they're demonstrating leadership, mentoring, collaboration, and higher order activities. So it's a very deep design. But I want to talk about one part of that we saw that was a good signal towards building community. We can see through our gamified space that people really were engaging in the space as individuals, but there wasn't a great deal as individuals moved up to the collaborative spaces. So we had a live event called the Festival of Learning, and at that event, before they came, we placed everybody into teams, named by bizarre airlines around the world. And those teams were randomly chosen. The people didn't know who was going to be in their team, and the teachers came from all over Australia. So they didn't know the people who were in their team. And they had a mission to complete over the 2 days of the live event. And we were not prepared for how much the teachers had dove into this activity. And you'll see here in this picture, 3 of the teachers, they made badges, symbols, scarves, all sorts of paraphernalia to give out to identify the members of their team. They met in coffee shops before they arrived at the event to make sure they knew who was doing which part of the challenge. And the teachers reported back to us that actual engaging together and competing against another group was actually a very bonding experience for them. And so I just want to give you a quote from one of the teachers who said, "Games winning doesn't drive me so much professionally. I also suppose it's difficult to play a game in which you're really challenging just yourself. I find it difficult to measure and challenge myself against people I don't know personally. I know online relationships can develop, but it was only after the Plain Festival that I could connect with real people and feel a little more engaged with the game. If it were a team sport, perhaps librarians versus maths, teachers might just grab me more particularly, and if there was time to play and develop the kind of camaraderie we had at the event." So the competition wasn't a dirty word at this event because people had that social negotiation over the time. The next case is Just Press Play from the Rochester Institute School of Interactive Games and Media. And this is a gamification program run across the 4 years of an undergraduate degree. And it's used various technologies from the first year with RFID tags through to QR codes now, and you can look a lot more about that online, and I have blogged about this particular case. You can see from this graphic there were 4 quadrants in the game and points in the gamification, and points were gained across each of those. Each mission, you gained points for each of the areas. And the 4 quadrants are loosely based off Bartle's player types, and you can imagine perhaps that an undergraduate degree didn't really want killers, so there is some adaptation there. But the aim of this was to build community, to build likelihood of success for students. And what they did was map the activities of highly successful students. So what is it that a highly successful student did in this program to get them through and excel? And then they took those kinds of activities and put them into a gamified program. Now, the majority of what's in this program is not curricular. So these are activities outside of that. So visiting a professor in office hours. Finding a professor in the wild and they're not all serious, some fun. Finding a professor in the wild, which is locating a professor somewhere else around campus or in town and getting them to sign off on your mission. So there are loads and loads of activities in there, and again, I don't have time to go into all of them, but we know from a lot of research that students who do well at university, it is usually because they're part of a community, because they're networked, because they have a sense of civic efficacy and engagement. And that's a really important part of the design of this program. So the signal I'm looking at here is in relationship to reciprocity and mutual accountability. And the students here, lecturer threw in this one challenge where in the past only 85% students had only ever attained an average of 85% on this particular subject. And the challenge was thrown out to see if they could get above that 85% in the last year. And they didn't know where it would go or how it would go. It was kind of an experiment. And the really exciting thing was a cohort of students, senior students, who have already done this subject, came to the professor and said, can we run coaching sessions for the freshmen on this project in those subjects? And she said, well, you don't have to ask me, you can go away and do it. And they did. And the enjoyment they got out of it, they have since said, well, they want to take that role up again next year. They really enjoyed running through the process with the other students. And yes, you want to ask, did they clear 90%? Yes, they did. But they're not claiming causality because there were a number of other conditions. But the exciting thing was not the grade of the students, it was those senior students coming to the lecture and volunteering to support other members and taking responsibility for other members, the learning of other members in their community. And the third signal I want to look at here is Bettendorf High School Teacher Professional Development. And this is a really sweet piece of gamification. Came from a science teacher in the school who had an idea, went to the principal and said, I really want to run this. The school was moving to become a one-to-one iPad school, and he devised a 10-level gamification system where at level 2 you would gain your iPad, and then after that you would move into doing various activities. And much like the plain activity, the level of leadership you needed to demonstrate as you moved up through those levels grew and grew. Now, I learned about this program because I was at a teacher conference where one of the teachers was there attaining her level 10. Now, level 10 in this system is you write a professional paper or present at a professional conference on your work with iPads in the school. So in the early levels, it's you learning to manipulate the technology. In the middle levels, it's giving back to the school. So the teachers are then, as a mission, you're designing other missions. And at the top level, it's giving back to your profession and raising the profile of your school. Now, that's a really beautiful progression in teacher professional development, and it's proven to be very successful. Because it wasn't mandated, and that's the other thing, none of the programs I've shown you are mandated. And so what they found was a clear signal in reputation. So you could do any number of 40 missions at a level and you only needed to attain 10 points out of that. But you could do a whole chain of missions. And if you completed that whole chain of missions, you got a title. And so you may not be able to read that, it's a bit fuzzy when it translated over from Keynote. That you could be the Tweenius, which was the genius at Twitter. Or you could be the Edmodo Dragon, which was the person with the greatest skill using Edmodo, which is extremely popular in schools. Now, it's not so much that teachers cared about those labels, but what they found as the progression went on, teachers were no longer coming to the IT support people for support in these technologies. They were going to the people on the leaderboard who had those titles. So it was starting to build an internal relationship between the teachers. So if you wanted to do Twitter, you were looking for who was on the Tweenius list and going to those people. And that they've reported has been a really exciting change in the use of technology in the school, because people are carving out their own niche for using particular technologies and recognising that you don't have to be an expert in all of them. And so that's a really interesting aspect of reputation out of a very sweet little program in a high school. Okay, and I must say in that past one, they did have extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, little things and little tchotchkes they gave the teachers, and teachers always love their tchotchkes. If you've ever been to a teachers' conference, you would know that. But they did have some extrinsic, intrinsic rewards, and it's a very juicy little system that they give away if anyone else would want to use it in their high school. So far I've demonstrated, demonstrated 3 signals that are really powerful about gamification programs and educational practice. So belonging, reciprocity and reputation are pretty big flags in community of practice development. So I think although it's really early days, there's some interesting work to be done in this space. But with a few caveats, belonging particularly needs to be looking at the relationship to each other before belonging to the whole community. And that's a really interesting thing, how we create those spaces where people can belong to a smaller group before they extend to the larger community. And we found with that Plain Live event, that really expedited their sense of belonging. In terms of reciprocity, again, that can't be mandated. People have to offer that. It has to be something that springs from them in their desire to be part of that community. And you saw that with the students who volunteered to go and teach the other students. And then reputation really only works, and we heard this earlier this morning, if people actually care about any of the reputation building. And even in a small community like Bettendorf High School in Iowa, teachers did care about carving out a reputation in relation to using technology. And I just want to close with a quote from one of those naysayer teachers at the very beginning after looking at some of the gamification activities across the board. And she said, "More frequent badges help me to engage as a user. I now know I have to achieve certain longer-term goals to get a badge and a level." So she's actually starting to come on board with the whole idea of competition and moving through levels in a gamified space in a professional community. So that's me, and I thank you for your forbearance at the early part of the session when the technology wasn't working. But if anyone wants to follow up on any of what I've had to say or know about any of the other cases I'm looking at, or if you have a case that you would like to point out to me, I'd really love to hear about it. So thank you very much.